Thank you guys for the time. Really enjoyed Rogue Agent, first off.
Thanks, Greg. Thank you.
Yeah, co-directing a narrative feature, I'm assuming from the outside looking in, is hard in and of itself. But with Rogue Agent, it seems that there's a little bit of journalism, or a lot of journalism and documentarian kind of aesthetic. Can both of you just kind of pretty much talk about just all of the work you guys put in, not just for it as a narrative, but just, I'm assuming there's just a pile of research that seems formidable. Was it formidable to both of you as far as getting in the weeds?
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Dick.
you can start that.
Okay. So yeah, Greg. So we came to the project. The project had been trundling on for a few years. So Michael Bronner, who was originally an investigative journalist like us, did the original research in the mid 2000s after the court case. Met a lot of the victims, people he's still in touch with, and wrote an amazing journalism article that was then optioned. And then he wrote a script. And then Declan and I were taken on to do a rewrite and then to direct. Right. So we met one of the producers, Kitty Kleski, about 2 years ago now, just before lockdown. And she sat down and she told us this story about Freeguard. And bearing in mind, we'd spent a decade investigating the world. This was the craziest story we'd ever heard. We were just like blown away. We just couldn't believe, it happened. We were instantly, intrigued by the hows, the whys, the people that fell for him, all that sort of stuff. And we realized very quickly it's an amazing story. It's a character film, and we love character. That's the way we write. I also personally, for me, had a bit of an affiliation. I dated a girl who had kind of sociopathic tendencies. She was a sociopathic liar. She'd spun a whole world of lies around her life that I totally bought into when I was an investigative journalist. And so there was some relatability there. And I think the more that I talked to Declan about that, the more we realized that there's a lot of relatability in the film. And one of the takeaways we want people to have is that this could really happen to anyone, So that's why we were initially intrigued about it. But, to get back to what you're saying, there's a lot of ethical kind of requirements when you take on a story like this. It's based on real people. So even though, our biggest task was to take all of Michael's wonderful work and somehow streamline it into 2 hours of entertaining narrative, genre-based filmmaking. And, we realized that we had to strip out a lot of characters, a lot of victims. So we had to take away a lot of bits of the truth. But what we fought for with the help of Michael and the victims was to retain the essence of what happened, so that hopefully now, and some of them have seen it and said to us, yes, it didn't, some of these bits didn't exactly happen like this, but that's how I felt. And that's how it felt at the time. And I think you've done a good job. So yeah, but it's a big process when you undertake these real stories, for sure.
When both of you are trying to really just get to the truth of a story, whether it's directing or co-writing, what happens when both of you have different ways of looking at the world, even though you guys are partners and collaborators? What happens when it meets a crossroad, and how does one compromise when each person is almost fixed in their take on the matter? Are you guys able to, you were mentioning streamline that, how are you able to actually work through that and come out with a better, I guess, result from said, positions?
Well,
So
Declan
we
just
have an arm,
tells
we have
me,
an arm,
Declan just
we have
tells
an
me to
arm
be quiet
wrestle.
and asks me to leave the room.
Does that work, Declan? Have him leave the room? Is it better?
We have an arm wrestle, and whoever wins. No, so basically, Greg, Adam and I have been working together on documentaries for a long time. We first met in 2009 on an investigative television show called BBC Panorama, and so we know each other very well, and we know each other's outlooks very well, right? But of course, there are times when we have different views on things. We've yet to come across a time where we weren't able to talk it out and compromise. But even more than that, I find that Adam's suggestions make mine better, and I think hopefully he thinks vice versa. So television and film are, as you know, intensely collaborative things. It's not like writing a novel or a poem where it is your singular vision. So it starts with Adam and I collaborating, and then it involves collaborating with James and Gemma and the producers and Larry, our wonderful cinematographer. And I think that our time in documentaries makes us less precious about imposing a vision on other people. I think we're very content to.
Totally. 100%, man. We spent many years in documentaries going in with the first cut of a doc and being completely ripped apart by producers. So we are totally used to taking notes. And, when you're a young documentarian or a young creative, you fight back a lot. And then at some point, if you're smart, you realize actually smart people make your work better. So we've taken that ethos into dramatic storytelling, of course. But also, Declan and I have a very, very similar view of the world, Greg. Like, we grew up in Northern Ireland towards the end of the conflict here, in a place that, had a lot of kind of terrible things happening. But, it taught us a lot about how the world works. It taught us a lot about resilience, about optimism. And I think we see the world in a very similar way. So if I'm doing, like, say I'm speaking, if I'm doing something on set and Declan comes up to me, I'll know there's a reason he's doing that, because he never just does it just for the sake of it. So I'll know, even if I don't totally agree, maybe I should listen to the big man this time, and vice versa. It kind of goes back and forth like that. So we always need each other. Like we do. I've always made each other's work better, from starting to write TV scripts now to directing. Definitely, we kind of feed off each other's energy. Speaking
of energy, I'm sure, what's the challenge in... I'm watching this movie and I'm just so frustrated. It's really great storytelling, but what's the challenge of I mean this in the best way. This is it almost feels like a public service announcement to people. Just really learn who to trust and whatnot. But what's it like actually crafting this narrative where the people who are watching it are going to be so frustrated by the events that are occurring, or maybe that's the job, because to actually help us and be warned about that human condition, So.
Yeah, I think there's a level in which it is a warning. As Adam says, he went through something similar, but I think whilst Freegard is an outlier, and what he did and got away with is very accentuated, I think the message of it really is that fantasists and illusionists exist all around us. Some of them are in positions of power in this world, and really the story is Alice's story. It's about, we have to be able to look ourselves honestly in the mirror. That's what she does. Ultimately, she looks at herself in the mirror and she says, "Who really am I? What do I want?" And so I guess if the film has a message, it's that, like, it's our own individual responsibility to be honest with ourselves, which is eventually what happens to Alice.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about, after watching this, I looked at your resume and I'm really excited. I think it's maybe next month on Peacock, The Undeclared War. Have you guys been working on this? And I saw a clip and I'm really heavily invested into checking this out. How has that journey been for you from Rogue Agent to, I guess, maybe, is it a limited or series work? It must be really intensive for both of you. Yeah. So
it's a series. So we actually did our work on The Undeclared War before we made Rogue Agent, and we were brought onto that by a great writer director called Peter Kuzminski. We worked on 2 episodes of The Undeclared War, and it was an incredible education in show running and filmmaking, because he is incredibly invested in getting things right. He's also, funnily enough, a former current affairs investigative journalist who moved into drama. But working with Peter taught us so much about treading that narrow path between fact and research and making entertaining fiction out of it. It was, basically it was like a university education in filmmaking and writing.
Yeah. How about you, Adam? Was it an education for you as well, just this whole process, and then going right into Rogue Agent as well?
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, like, so we had a show out in the BBC a couple of years ago called The Salisbury Poisonings. That was essentially our first dramatic child that was born into the world. We wrote that. We didn't direct it. So that was a limited 3-parter for the BBC that then went on AMC in the States. And that was obviously a massive step up from doing documentaries. Like, that was a huge education for us. And then we did our short film, which was a dark comedy look on punishment attacks, which is a very severe issue in Belfast. That did very well. Like, it won an Irish TV Academy Award and different things like that, a few big festivals. And that's what gave us the chance to pitch for Rogue Agent. And then around that time, we were also working on some other TV projects, one of which was Peter's The Undeclared War. And like, that was another, as Declan says, a great education, because he ran a writer's room and he just arrived with like 4 years of meticulous research about GCHQ, and which is the the intelligence, the cyber intelligence government entity in the UK. And like, he just came of like, we spent the first 4 days out of 5 just talking about character, and we were like, wow, this is how you do it. You don't worry too much about the story. It'll always fall in. You build your characters out. And he just comes from the same place of character writing that we do. So it was a great education for us, as Declan said. And definitely experiences like that, of course, they help you then when you're going on to do your first feature as well.
Final couple questions, just regarding investigative journalism and working on documentaries. Is there a discipline and focus that you guys both pretty much carved out from those practices that made directing Rogue Agent for you pretty much a seamless process, and what you guys do right now as a team in your various works, having that foundation, I guess?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we made a lot of documentaries, dozens of them, and whilst stepping onto the set on the first morning on Rogue Agent with a large crew to make a drama was obviously in some senses intimidating. It was by no means the worst or scariest situation we'd ever been in. We had worked in very difficult places in the world. We had been under extreme pressure in some of the stories we told before. So there is an element in which that decade certainly helped us move into drama, because I guess we've been through the mill on a few things, and together as well.
Yeah.
We formed a bond of trust in some difficult situations. And I guess we brought that trust and that friendship into this.
Also, the other thing it gives you, Dec, is confidence, right? So we spent many years in the trenches of the world investigating how people's lives work. So when it comes to, even though our directing actor experience is limited, like one short film before this, like we've met a lot of people in the world in very stressful situations. We know how people react to things. We know how families react when terrible things happen. And I think a lot of that really helps when you're working on character, and like working with James and talking him through the psychology of someone. Yeah. Like, I think all of that feeds into directing. So like, even though it is a different world, we're very well versed in how the world works. And I think when it comes to representing the world then in a dramatic sense, it's given us a bit of a kind of toolkit for that, I guess, But of course, there was so much to learn, like, there was a lot to do. Like, I think we had 26, 27 locations in 29 days. So like, that was a suicidal undertaking. So like, there's things you might not do that the same way again, but you learn a lot on your first film for sure.
And my final question is, and maybe it's the quick answer, or the easy answer is just to get on with it. But when you're in difficult situations, or you're interviewing and researching people, real people, what's the challenge of actually turning over that story? Because I'm sure you're human beings, you get personally invested in the story, the people you work with, the people you interview. But then after all that emotions and life that hits you, you have to sit down and write something that means something. So what's the challenge in that? It feels very intimidating for me as someone who's not an expert like you guys are.
Well, I would say first, I'll pass this over to you, Dec. The first thing I would say is that you need to always retain a sense of respect for the person's story that you take. So when you sit down and someone tells you their story, right, they're often giving you the most vulnerable things in their life, something they may not even tell their family members. So you're a custodian of that vulnerability that they've given you, right? And it's very difficult. We find it frustrating in journalism. Dec will speak to this too, because we felt we could never do those things proper justice, because we just didn't have the creative framework in journalism. And one of the reasons we moved into drama was to tell character stories, and that's why we think we can tell it here. So that's why it is interesting. So you take that testimony from people, and then, you sit down and we all sit together and think, how can we represent this fairly and still make it work within the characters that we can put in this time frame and the narrative that we're shaping? And it's a long process. And you're often in constant contact with the people you've interviewed to make sure that they're happy and to make sure it's all okay. So it's a difficult undertaking. Dec?
Yeah, no, look, I would just echo exactly what you said. I mean, we learned it a long time ago in documentaries, but as soon as you put someone on screen, a real person, you're the custodian of their character. And I think that it's the second most important thing to people, behind their physical existence and their health is their character and their reputation. And you learn that very early on. And I think it's something we hopefully kind of carry through into drama, where even when you have to sacrifice literal truth for the dramatic essence of a story, that you hope that the people who experience the real thing will look at it and say, you've captured the essence of what we went through. That's our hope for this film anyway. Very, very much so.
Great. Thank you guys so much for your time. Really appreciated your film. Really loved it.
Thanks, Greg. It was lovely to meet you.
Lovely to talk to you, man. Thank you so much.
Thanks for those great questions as well, man. Those were really good questions. Thank you.
And go easy on Adam, because the arm wrestling thing scared me a bit. So be careful. Thank you so much.